Elissa Strauss, I'm so glad you're here today. You were the perfect person to invite to our discussion about the evolution of work-life integration. And because part of it is as simple as the fact that when I started ThirdPath 25 years ago, I knew that care was the most important thing that was missing. We were figuring out a world where everybody could work, but we had kind of lost track of a world where we were creating time for care. And so over 25 years, I think what we've been doing is trying to create an organization that supports people to go ahead and figure out solutions where they can do work and care, as opposed to work or care. And what's beautiful about your book is that you've hit so many of the important topics around how to help people to do that. I'm including a great chapter on men, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. Um, and so to me, you just hit a nerve that was so important. In fact, for those of you who are listening in today, and Elissa doesn't even know this, we're going to give away 2 copies of your book as a giveaway. You just need to, if you're listening in right now, put your name and a mailing address into the chat, and we will give 2 books away because, again, we think her message is so important. It is the direction we need to all go in, creating a world with more care. In fact, you have a great line. We all want to live in a society where good care is big, possible, and abundant. Boy, do I believe in that. And boy, do we have some work to do to get there. So tell me about it. Why is care an important public good? And you used in your book a story to help illustrate that. It was actually a movie that I went and watched called Encanto, where one of the children's superpower is to kind of care for the family. So why is care a public good? And tell me about that connection.
Yeah, I mean, to start with Encanto, right? You have this family that's falling apart and they all have superpowers and they're all kind of using their superpowers to solve isolated problems and kind of they're all caught up in a way in what I'm sure everyone on this call at least would think of as productivity culture, right? Like, how can I just go for it, do, bigger, better, bigger, better. And like, no one's really thinking about interconnectivity. And then you have our wonderful protagonist, our hero, our true hero, Mary Bell, who doesn't think she has a superpower, who feels like she's left out of this family where everyone else has some kind of encanto and enchantment, but she didn't get it. And what's revealed through the movie is that she had a superpower, and her superpower was understanding that we can't be siloed. Like, interconnectivity is essential. And the house has this beautiful, really almost biblical metaphor. Sorry, the movie has this beautiful metaphor in which the house itself is sick. Like the house, like tiles are falling off the roof, cracks are happening in the walls, the staircase is crumbling. So it's just it's a totally on the nose and also really kind of majestic and kind of mythical, right, metaphor of what happens when we ignore the superpower that is care, that is interconnectivity, that is keeping our homes and families in good shape. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think when we think of Encanto and we think of how is care a public good, I mean, I think you have a brick wall behind you, and I use this metaphor all the time, right? We have all these things that we kind of accept matter as a society. We'll start with dignity, right? Like, all humans deserve dignity. And we think of dignity as this big, beautiful concept, and it's, written about in human rights papers and discussed in the UN. But how does like one person actually receive dignity? It's through care, right? It's through intimate care that happens behind closed doors. And as I say, care is the brick through which, like, the great cathedrals of dignity are built. Care is the brick through which the great cathedrals of interdependence and community is built. And I think we've long kind of acknowledged, no man is an island. That was said, 500 years ago by John Donne. We've always known, like, we know that humans are a web of dependence, but we've had this real blind spot that care is how this dependence happens. And we have the blind spot. I'm sure we'll dig into this, later, because care mostly happened since the industrial revolution. Care mostly happened behind closed doors and was something that women did, and therefore was never quite elevated to the status it deserves. And now we're paying for that with the care crisis we're in.
Yeah, and you just marched us right into that next important topic because, one of the things you talk about is men and caregiving. The rise of the male caregivers and how care changes men is one of your chapters. And what's so interesting is you do such a thorough job of understanding what's going on here. And, you talk about how, actually men's home-based work was quote unquote hit harder by the changes of the Industrial Revolution. I was so glad you talked about that because that is one of the big changes. We were kind of more integrated, one could argue, in agrarian
Yeah.
times, and then became the work or care solution in industrial age. But you also go into other things like how men are changed by being involved with care. And the more they're involved, the more they're changed. And we've certainly seen that at ThirdPath. It was just beautiful to read about. You even reference a researcher, Sylvia Sarah Canetto, who showed us over and over again that an integrated approach is a healthier approach for all of us, that we do better when we can apply our minds and think and do some work that feels productive and good, but we can also do that relational, connected activity. We as humans do better when we have time for both. Um, so I wanted to talk a little about men in care, but I wanted to look at it from a systems perspective, and I'll explain more in a second. In fact, a great example of a system, people who are listening in today can join a little mini breakout group with Bridget Schulte, who showed a whole country can change the system. And you can create it so that everybody has more time for their lives outside of work because they're working shorter work weeks. And no surprise, it has this positive impact on gender equity. So to get men's change to happen, we have to look at the system of care. Another example of a system for those who are listening in, if you have a workplace, which more and more are doing, that go to a 4-day work week or a 6-hour workday, that's the whole organizational system has changed the equation so people have time for work and life, whatever that life is, caring for their children, caring for themselves, caring for an aging person. So the system needs to be changed. And what I wanted to talk with Elissa about is, what about family systems? What did you learn and what can we do? What makes you most hopeful about family systems changing and men's involvement with care and family systems? And what makes you less hopeful?
So to start on the hopeful note, I just realized this because I tip optimist. I cannot help it. Uh, I just realized like 2 days ago that out of all the just personal emails I've gotten from total strangers about my book of people who read it and were really moved by it, they have largely been from men. I mean, really, I'm not a great numbers person, but I'd say like 80% men
Wow. Hmm.
have read my book and have been so moved because so much written about care, both the struggles of care and the burdens of care and the transcendent qualities of care have focused on women. And so I just want to start there. Like, I can say, this is an example of one, this is anecdotal, but in my experience already, I'm getting a really deep response from men who appreciate having a book that sees them as people who parent, who do caregiving, and are changed by it, are having these profound experiences. So I think that also tracks with the data I found in my book. I mean, listen, there's no question about it. Women shoulder way more the burdens of care than men, and it affects their ability to participate in the workforce, to care properly for themselves. So, I just want to say that out loud, like we're hardly at equity. But when we look at those changes and we look at where progress and hope is, I think that helps kind of light the path of like how to keep going in that direction, right? Um, so I'm seeing men also, and I'm sure, Bridget could speak to this beautifully, right? Like women aren't the only one experiencing burnout. Men are also having their own aha moments that like a life fully devoted to work is not that satisfying. And I think even when we look at generationally, my husband's a way more active and engaged father than my dad. My mom did most of kind of the work of care, but he was definitely emotionally very available, right? So he was like, the loving, fun dad. He worked and he didn't worry about the list of things to do, but he was emotionally present. My husband is both emotionally present and, organizes play dates and dentist visits and that kind of stuff. And then I think back of my grandfather, he was neither really emotionally present, nor did he handle any of the kind of labor stuff. He just saw himself as the provider. And I think, and he, this is the time when the father would come home at the end of the day and go to the study to have the whiskey and the pipe. I mean, not that my grandpa actually did that or many of ours did it, but it was that kind of, right. It was that mentality, like father needs a break because he's spent his life working. So I don't think even among conservatives, and this is what we're seeing a lot now with kind of JD Vance and this I've been reading a lot of articles lately that the pro-life movement wants to call itself the pro-family movement. So even among people who might have more traditional definitions of the family or traditional ideas about the distribution of labor in a family are changing their ideas of what it means to be a present and active father, right?
Yeah.
So we're seeing that change. We're seeing dads understand that work isn't everything. We're seeing them also kind of want for themselves the space of receptivity and vulnerability and softness that care can offer them in a world that expects them to be none of those things. And so I think, right, we have a lot of reasons to hope that the cultural change is in motion.
Yes.
We
The
are,
cultural. Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
we're missing the stress. So the bad stuff, right, is that we're missing the structural support to help keep that cultural change going, to help really make it not something that people kind of long for and have to navigate as individuals, but have structures that actually support them.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
the lowest hanging fruit there, and we've all probably said it so many times already, we can't believe we're saying again, is paid leave for all, right? Like paternity leave should be universal. The data is overwhelming that it helps set in motion. It doesn't just help fathers be more present during the time of their leave, it helps fathers be more present basically forever. So I'll stop there. I could go all day with all this stuff. So
well, thank you. Those were really important points that you've already covered. I think that what I want to underscore is you're right. We need big structural changes. And I guess what I thought about 25 years ago is what can we do to help families go ahead and reach for this right away? Even though that's not where we want to end, right? We want to have more structural changes. But what we saw was when we support professionals to think this way over the course of their careers, they become managers who manage their teams in a more supportive way. They become leaders who run organizations that are more open and thinking in this way. And so, and when you get a whole organization thinking this way, that is a pretty significant change. Even if it's, just small organizations, 500 or less person organizations, half of America works in 500 or less person organizations. So there is this opportunity of helping professionals become leaders who think this way and how that changes things. In fact, what we're going to be talking a little bit about in my breakout group later on is how it's challenging, though, to do that. It's challenging to be a leader and live an integrated life. We are not promising nirvana to do that, but it's possible. All right. There's another really important topic I want to make sure we talk about because I feel like this has been a hidden topic for a while. When we try to solve the care equation, I don't want to solve it on the backs of women and particularly women of color, because the way we solve it is poorly paid caregivers, right? They're doing childcare, they're doing elder care, and they're poorly paid. It's primarily women of color. I don't want to build it on the backs of women who already are doing too much. I want to change the whole equation. I want unpaid caregivers to feel like they can make this change and paid caregivers. In fact, I imagine a world where my fantasy world is we make it so that grandfathers and uncles, not just moms and dads, can figure out how to work a shorter work week and be involved with the care equation. That's my fantasy world. So what's briefly some advice or something you've been learning about how to address this solution where it's not, where unpaid and paid care becomes the way we solve it, not on the back of one or the other?
Right. And just to take us back a step, right? I think a lot of the successful feminism, it wasn't the only feminism, but the successful feminism of the late 20th century, and this was mostly feminisms by upper class and white women, was right about getting women into the workforce I appreciate it. I've benefited from it. It wasn't, I'm not saying it was a mistake, but as it played out, there just became this big blind spot to the fact that like care is still something that needs to happen, and who's going to do it, right? And it's often women of color, or low income women, whether in childcare centers or working as nannies or babysitters in the home. So we didn't really like, it kind of felt good. And we had, I had my first kid in 2012. It was the year Lean In was published, like, corporate feminism. It felt like there was momentum and we had kind of figured things out, but we just like never really addressed the realities of care in a meaningful way, in a vision of women's empowerment. And that's what we're doing now. And it's hard work. It's really hard to untangle care from the patriarchy and figure out what like real justice looks like, but we have to do it. Like we're there, particularly now that there's so many more people caring as America ages. So we're not just talking about parents, we're talking about elder care. And that's just like, I mean, what is it? 73% of us, or I don't know what it's almost all of us. It really is. And certainly probably all of us at some point or another. So I think in terms of solutions, like I don't consider myself a policy buff. I'm more like I dug into the culture surrounding all this in my book, more than I dig into specific policy approaches. But the thing that I feel overwhelmingly convinced by is that like it's a more is more kind of thing. It's not about finding the one solution that works for everyone. We need solutions integrated into our workplaces. We need solutions integrated into our government policies. We need to understand that what you need one year may be different than what you need the next year. So, things like job share programs that are more common in Europe, where you could work 3 days, someone else works 3 days, or I guess, right, 3 and 3, and you overlap by one day. That's one example of how we can keep people in the workforce, but make more time for care. And that's in the culture change piece of this is huge, because we have to look at that as something that shows commitment to the workforce, not someone who's kind of stepping back or less committed. Like we have to really understand that doesn't mean you're less ambitious or committed. I think, right, another example of just like another policy we can layer into this is Sweden just expanded parental leave for grandparents. And that's when we can not just find ways to create, kind of government supported infrastructure for care, whether it's more childcare centers, elder care centers, or more respite workers to send to give home family caregivers at home relief. Like we need all that, but we also need investment in the networks we already have. And because many of us like just don't have the time or financial capacity to stop and care for someone, care for our grandkids, or offer that help maybe a neighbor will need. But the more we can kind of invest both in big infrastructure and invest in communities, I think the closer we'll get.
Yeah. Yeah. And you and I talked about how it's going to keep on changing how families solve it. And we need to remember that it's not going to look uniform for families. And so the more we can create diverse and flexible solutions, and that's why how we approach workplaces becomes so critical, right? Because we have this opportunity now of also doing work so differently that we need to sustain and continue this whole ability that, some jobs can be done remotely or hybrid or compressed work weeks. There's all kinds of answers that can be happening.
Right.
Again, part of it's leadership thinking differently in workplaces. And that's why ThirdPath's work, really supporting leaders to think differently, has been, I think, some of the more, I'm excited about all of our work, but I've been really excited to see how that continued support of professionals to think differently has created teams and leaders to think differently. Wow, lots
Yeah, I
more we
just
could.
want to add to
Good.
that, right? Like we do actually know what to do in so many ways. It's really like the culture change piece of this is so huge, right?
Yeah.
It's like we have a good solid list already of if these things could just happen without stigma and with understanding that they don't actually impact bottom line and in fact can increase productivity, right? Like so it's that's why I really wrote a culture change book, because why can't we see this,
Yeah.
why can't we
Yeah.
see that this is part of life? It actually doesn't have to get in the way if we just thoughtfully integrate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the last thing I wanted to ask Elissa about is because, I think in a system, we learned a long time ago that systems change because each person in a system changes too. It's not just the external changing It's the
Yeah.
person's changing. So I wanted to bring it back to Elissa and think about, you talked about something in your book over and over again that I think is so important. We can do care if we're well rested. Otherwise, care can feel too big and too overwhelming and exhausting. And so us as caregivers need to find ways to sustain ourselves as caregivers. And I thought that was really important for us to remember. Both work can be overwhelming and care can be overwhelming. And so what have you learned for yourself or your family around how to kind of recharge and have energy for care? Tell us what you've learned.
Yes, I think it starts really with like internalizing what just is true, but our culture doesn't tell us this, that we cannot care well for another if we don't have a self, right? It just, we will not, from a place of exhaustion and constant sacrifice, like that's not actually the care my kids need. It's not benefiting anyone. And I think through the research I did in my book, and you know, one example, right, is I dug into Charles Darwin and I realized like my understanding of human evolution was totally wrong, and that the story I was told ignored care, but Charles Darwin actually didn't ignore care. So the more I saw how care actually, like a deeper understanding of care is out there, we've just been denied it, the more I realized how kind of like big and essential of an endeavor care is. And when I saw it as bigger, it allowed me more permission for myself to know that I need to refuel. Care, I think we've been, sold the lie that care is like a gentle walk around a pond. And we've been sold that lie because it was very convenient for the patriarchy to basically keep women inside and doing the care. And I think as anyone who's done care knows, right, it's not a gentle walk around a pond. It's kind of like climbing a very, some people Mount Everest, some people Mount Whitney, but like a very tall mountain. When you climb that tall mountain and you're training for it, you just can't keep going and going and going and going. You need food, you need rest, right? So I think really digging in, and again, from everything to seeing how care is essential in the human evolution story, like as important as competition. I was never taught that, right? The more I saw care as like this truly this big, profound thing that is an essential ingredient for humanity, the more I was comfortable seeing it as Mount Everest and not as the walk around the pond. And seeing myself almost, I'm not a great athlete, but as like a great athlete really does a lot to keep their body in good shape, right? Like you can't be reckless if you're going to show up and do some great, play a big game or do some endurance sport, to get into that mind frame, because I think it's just one of the most toxic myths is that care is easy, should be easy, and if it's not, you're doing it wrong. And this is where the culture change piece really, comes in, and we internalize that. And then when someone is going through a really hard moment with a care experience in our office, like we understand, again, this isn't the walk around the pond. This is Mount Everest. They're not going to be hiking it forever. How can we show up for them? Because they matter. They're probably going to come back from that experience. The research shows this, with some skills that are actually going to really benefit the workplace, right? So like stick with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you and I talked a little bit about the intersection of how what's happened over the last 25 years is technology has changed for the better and for the worse. In fact, one of the breakout groups that Elissa is going to be running is about technology. And when I was listening to Elissa talk about this the first time, she also talked about how there is this overlay of our work is coming at us all the time and care needs are coming at us all the time. And how do we handle everything coming at us all the time? And, you talked about a couple of things that you do as a family system, you personally, to kind of put a pause and create some breathing room. Because if we want to have energy for care and for work, we need to do that as well. What have you learned around that? Um,
Yeah. So yeah, I think, I had my moment when I realized that if you're picking up your phone, you're checking emails, and while you're making dinner, while the kids are there, like you're gonna have your work mindset on. You're gonna have a certain expectation of like productivity and how conversations should go. And like making dinner and engaging with your little kids like is not actually gonna slot into that mindset. And I think I've noticed this is a great source of kind of way underdiagnosed stress among parent friends of mine, because they're like they can't because of technology, right? We're not leaving work at work. And we talk so much about the invisible labor of parenthood that we bring into the workplace, very real, right? We don't talk that much about the invisible labor of work that we bring into parenting. That's actually making parenting like a lot less enjoyable because your kids aren't your colleagues. They're never going to act like them. They're crazy, and we love them for it. So I, and it's my son just got his first computer, and we're talking about how he has to learn to like how do you manage, right, like your time on it, and how much time does he get on it. We're working through this together, and I was just telling him last night, and this is something I told you when we talked about, like, I downloaded something called app lock on my phone that basically turns my phone into a dumb phone between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. every morning and all weekend. And I was telling Augie, my 12-year-old who just got the computer, I was like, listen, like, I can't even handle it. Like, I've been, I had a BlackBerry way back when. I've been in this game for a long time. It is so hard to create boundaries when technology makes them disappear so easily. Like, I feel like I'm someone with decent self-control as a human, and I couldn't stand a chance, right, of just not picking up that smartphone. So I think it's like we have to be aware of that, the other invisible labor, right? We have to be aware of when work is just like wrapping its tentacles around our care moments without us even realizing it, because work's always right there. How poisonous that is for everything. It's for work and care, and that we really are a little powerless against these devices. I mean, again, I'm not someone with a particularly addictive personality. And like, I just think we're all powerless. They are designed to keep us checking and checking. And our workplaces know this, right? And designed to keep us working and working. And, oh, don't worry about it till the morning, but if you pick up and you saw the email at 9 p.m., like, you're going to worry about it before the morning. So, right, practical solution. A big fan of these app lock, or it's ironic, you have to pay to make your phone, right, $30 a year to make your phone dumb part-time. But also, I think truly liberating, and the fact that we need it. Like, most of us, maybe you are all more disciplined than I am, but I don't think you
No,
probably are.
they're
Yeah, I
counting
don't
on
think.
us. They're counting
Yeah,
us not to be disciplined. Yeah.
right,
Good.
exactly. Like,
Good. Yeah.
we need these boundaries. Like, we need
Yes.
help. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's really great. I'm glad you talked about that one, because I think so many of us listening in today really are struggling with this issue. And when I think about the evolution of work-life integration, that's the big change that also happened, is how technology has become very invasive. So the tentacles of work around our care moments is a beautiful phrase you used. All right. All right. Welcome back. I know that those breakout group discussions are pretty amazing. We had a really powerful one ourselves. There's something about bringing a very smart community together to talk about these things. We've all had experiences that we can draw from. And I really left with so much more knowledge about where we've been around the work-life integration evolution and where we're going. And I'm an eternal optimist. I think there's a lot of opportunity for moving ahead for the next 25 years. So we're going to do a quick summary of some of the things that people learned from their breakout groups. Elissa, thank you for running the one on technology. Take a couple minutes. I'm sure you'll need more than that, but take a couple minutes to tell us what you learned.
I think I'm not sure we really came up with much in the way of solutions, but I think we work towards diagnosing the problem, which may help bring us solutions. Just a bit more clarity. And I think, first we really spoke a lot about having to create those boundaries for yourself. And it really goes both ways, whether you're checking your work email at night or first thing in the morning. And a couple of us work across time zones. So that's, I'm doing work for a foundation right now in the Netherlands. So I know, like, I wake up and there's a whole day of work waiting for me. And that's not a healthy thing to read at 7 a.m. So we talked about, right, how technology, we really do appreciate the opportunities it's brought us, including this, right? But at the same time, it is just so tricky that, right, it's not just the work leaking into the personal, it's also the personal kind of weaving into our workday. Jay brought up the kind of stress he feels when he gets a personal text message during the workday and feels like he really doesn't have the capacity necessarily. And Jay, if I'm misspeaking, correct me, to respond to it. Like, in with, I mean, the ability, project myself, like with the empathy he'd want to, but you kind of feel like you can't leave a text message for nighttime. So we don't, I think it was just a very useful conversation and making us aware of actually this is just so tricky for us every day in and out. And then the last place that where we ended was about just how big of a part of care technology has become, whether we're caring for children
Mhm.
or for our parents, right? Or for seniors who struggle with tech. And we spoke a lot about that. And I think it was just eye-opening that this is like one of the big pieces of care right now, whether it's practical managing tech, monitoring tech, and also the need to make sure these two populations have real, like a healthy tech literacy to not find themselves in places that won't serve them or scam them of their money. I'll stop
Oh,
there.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I think we should have a whole experience around just this topic, because it's here to stay, and it's shaping so much of what's happening for us, and we don't know always pay attention to it, but it yet is really powerful. I'll give you one quick story, and then we're going to hear from my group. It's connected to my group's information. One theme that came up when ThirdPath started first looking at leaders who want to live an integrated life, that really stuck with me, was a theme that just bubbled up, that some of the leaders I knew had learned how to turn off technology on vacations. They really separated from work, and they just got into their vacation head for vacations. Now, they couldn't do it every time, but it bubbled up as this interesting theme. This is 15 years ago, and how it's gotten even more complicated to do that today. Yet it showed me something that you guys are touching on, which is there is a personal skill set that we need to learn around how to do this well. However, there are things organizations can do. And so I'm very proud at ThirdPath, we are now have 2 different times in the year, once in August and once around the holidays, where we collectively turn off work for a week. Because guess what? It's a hell of a lot easier, excuse my French, to turn off things when you do it collectively. So again, I think we're all just getting smarter around this. And that brings me to my topic, which was how leaders are critical to making more change happen. Yet it's so hard to make change happen and support leaders to become these change agents. It's a slow process. Yet there was some really great, I'm just going to tell you the positive ones, because you all know it's slow to change leaders. But some of the positive ones was, you can manage up. And so you can be this team that kind of helps a leader think differently. And you don't have to take on the whole organization. You can create a little bubble of a team thinking and doing it differently inside an organization. And that's very powerful for everybody, the leader and the team. You can get smart about, okay, so there's some old guard here, but we're really trying to get the new guard here. Let's get clear about what we're looking for when we're hiring new leaders, and make sure we look for those abilities in new leaders. And let's reward leaders for this new approach, where they are much more relational in their work with their teams, and support more flexibility. And so we really had some great ideas about how we can promote some more change around leaders, and how important leaders are for change, because we concluded with employees want this. More and more employees want this. And if anybody has an example of a manufacturing organization with a great leader, I want that case study, because stories, as Bridget has learned and I have learned, help people imagine things. So we want to keep on getting those stories out there about how it's being done differently. And last but not least, us being role models ourselves, being upfront that we live whole lives, and sometimes it's complicated as leaders. Boy, does that help others feel permission to do this as well. So lots of good ideas bubbled up around how we can support more change for leaders. All right, I want to hear from the men and care group. Will, what did you guys learn?
Well, the four of us had a wonderful 30-minute conversation. And we shared along 3 lines. One, what does caring or caregiving look like? What's it look like? And what are some examples in our life? And what do we need, men that are caretakers, what do we need as we move forward? Um, and so I'll tell you what it looks like is people who drop everything and adapt their life to give their time and their effort sacrificially to the need, to the need. It looks like, or at least requires, caregiving freedom to provide the care. It really does. Um, so what does it look like? We sort of unpacked that with some examples. We talked about spouses who have had cancer and what that looks like. We've talked about children um, who just have the day-to-day needs from 0 up to teenagers and beyond, but also the complexities that happen as children grow up with special healthcare requirements. Um, and we talked about having parents or in-laws at the same time that live with us. We talked about friends. We talked about veterans. We talked about the community that sometimes calls us out of just the family system to care. So we talked about all of that. It was just really a wonderful. And as we talked about, well, moving forward, what do men who are in caretaking roles need? A really, I think, powerful but simple statement was um, men need to be included when we're talking about caretaking. You know, it just needs to be recognized that men can do it, are doing it, and are part of it. And in the case of the guys that I was talking to, at least 2 of them are full-time caregivers to their children. They are just all in everything. So it's the first thing is just recognition to be included in the conversations around caregiving. The other was we need more tools, and I think we need more resources. I mean, our little group, I think, served its a purpose of encouraging each other and just recognizing that we can talk about this and get and the group gets it. But I think, you know, when we need help, we need to be able to have additional resources to reach out to, and then we can get a response, a trusted response from the larger community. And I think going forward, it would be nice if we could see our city, our community, our society move more in the direction of providing more opportunities for leave, for parental leave, and more flexibility and more recognition that men are part of this solution and want to be a part of the solution. So that's my 3 minutes.
This is an obvious question, Will. So care is work. Care can be overwhelming at times. On a balance, how has care made your life better? Is it something worth reaching for as men?
Absolutely, especially if you're thinking about it in terms of a holistic view, because it requires self-care, right?
Mhm.
Where, you know, care, giving, and self-care, they go together. In fact, self-care really, I think, as we talked about it, is a prerequisite for good caregiving.
Mhm.
You know, as I think Michael said, put on your oxygen mask on the plane first and breathe that oxygen before you then reach out and try and put the oxygen mask on other people.
Yeah,
So we need a nurturing environment
yeah,
ourselves.
yeah, yeah. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, Bridget, I don't know if you got a chance to talk with anybody about the amazing Iceland experience. It will uplift us. Share a little takeaways.
Okay, well, I'll be really brief because I see we're at 2:29, but it was a great conversation. Lots of people had so much to bring to it as well. So it was a really good conversation. And basically, what I'll just say is I went to Iceland because here I wanted to look at the short work hours movement. And here it was very, at the time, very elitist, kind of like knowledge workers only. And that made me really worried. If you were going to have all the tech bros with their 4-day work weeks and then going surfing on Fridays, so many women who are working in care jobs are already working 7 days a week. That just felt like a gender dystopia for me. And so then I ran into Alex Pang, as you know, the author of Rest and Shorter. And he said, well, you really should look into Iceland, where they've made short work hours available to 85% of the population. And so I did, and I spent time talking with not just the tech bros, but fish processing plants and the police and childcare workers and nurses and pool attendants, shift workers, and it was really, it was really interesting. It started small with some pilots in the city of Reykjavik and then more nationally. And they did it for two reasons. One was for well-being, for better, physical and mental health, and reducing stress. And the other was for gender equality. And they were really worried that if they cut the work hours, paid work hours for men, that they would just go to the gym. But they found that that wasn't the case, that men became very involved with their families, that there was just a noticeable, again, greater sense of connection and feelings of satisfaction and happiness. The police officer that I talked to, this detective, he said, I used to not know what size my kids' clothes were. Now I'm the one that does this shopping. Just small things like that. That if any of you have ever had kids, you know how huge that is for the mental load as well as everything else. I actually profiled a single dad who had 3 kids, and he calls his short workday his sacred time. And he was able to go and do his grocery shopping, get all of that kind of grunt work done before he went and picked up his kids from school and childcare. And then talking to the kids, they had this magical evening where they made a pizza together and like laughed and enjoyed each other. And the young son said, yeah, we used to be so tired. Everybody be cranky, grab, take us with him to the grocery store. And then we just, flop on the couch. Everybody be so exhausted. We'd just watch TV. And now it's really different. So I shared some of those stories. And then really the key is, and I think in part of the conversation, what we talked about is how this was a systems change that was getting really clear about what the real value of the work is. And then doing away with those ideal worker cultures that value long hours and presence that really don't have anything to do with effective work or performance, and how it was critical to identify that key core work and then work backwards from there to create processes that led to that, rather than getting stuck in emails and looking busy, because that's what's rewarded. And that effective work can lead to fairer work, more equity, across race and class and gender, but it also leads to better profits and productivity. This one travel agency that I spent time with, when they went to shorter work hours and went through that process of being more effective, they've actually grown 3 times now and are much more profitable. And Delta made a really great case how it's important when we're making the case it doesn't really matter how people get there. And if it's profits in the bottom line, that is what is going to bring leaders along to really help them see and make that case. So systems, processes, the importance of vision and buy-in from leaders, being willing to experiment, but really also how critical it is to have a process to train middle managers in particular, that you can't just flip a switch and think it's going to happen, that it's you have to be very intentional about it and iterate and gather data, and know that it's a process, and that giving that power to the people closest to where the work is, they're the ones that are going to have the best ideas. And that's something you can do whether you're in Iceland or in the United States, in any organization, any team, or you yourself can do. It's possible on any of those levels.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm really hearing. I mean, we really left with the idea of how can we show that this can work in any type of industry? And that's what Bridget's Iceland experiment shows, right? It can work anywhere, if with the right tools that she just described. All right, so I hope what you're seeing is the evolution of work-life integration is looking bright. Thank you, everybody, for being role models, for being change agents, for doing the excellent books you've done, for continuing this journey with ThirdPath. I really want to thank you all for being here today. It's really wonderful.